The sky above Nirac 6 was the color of rusted iron, smeared with streaks of ash-colored clouds that never moved, never shifted, only hovered in oppressive stillness. Tori Briggs stood alone in the emptiness, a thin silhouette against a dead landscape. Dust clung to her boots, powdered her sleeves, and settled into the creases of her cracked lips. She didn't bother brushing it off anymore. The red dust owned this place, and now it owned her. The last transport shuttle had departed 16 days ago. She'd stood on the plateau and watched it disappear into the haze, a distant roar that grew thinner and thinner, until there was nothing left but silence. No one had argued with her when she said she wouldn't go. The crew chief gave a brief shrug, jotted something on his pad, and moved on to more pressing issues. No one expected her to survive, and no one was going to wait around to see if she did. The colony had failed. Terraforming efforts stalled after the second year. The atmosphere refused to stabilize, the soil remained inert, and the imported flora withered into skeletal curls within weeks. Resources were diverted to other systems. Nirac 6 was officially declared non-viable. In human terms, that meant, forget it, move on. But Tori didn't forget. She had been part of the initial engineering crew that mapped the subsoil aquifers. She had seen the scans herself. Pockets of preserved groundwater locked beneath layers of compacted clay and volcanic crust. Not much, not enough to save a city, but enough to save someone who refused to die. She chose her site carefully. The southern ridge offered shelter from the worst of the windstorms, and the exposed plateau provided a view across several kilometers of dead land, flat, fractured, and dotted with black boulders that looked like ancient bones. The remains of a terraformer outpost slumped nearby, half swallowed by the sand. Its communications panel was beyond repair, but the storage room still held a few solar panels and a collapsed supply rack. Tori salvaged what she could. She set up a tarp using broken support rods and stitched it down with torn fibers from her pressure suit. It wasn't elegant, but it gave her a patch of shade. Then she began the real work. Digging. She didn't have a drill. What she had was a half-rusted entrenching tool, a hammer with a cracked grip, and a chisel made from a sharpened steel pipe. It would have been madness anywhere else, but madness had already passed through Nirac and moved on. All that remained now was determination. The first day, she scraped through the topsoil and found only ash and glass pebbles. By evening, her hands were shaking. The solar still produced half a liter of drinkable water, barely enough to stay upright. She drank in silence and fell asleep curled beneath the tarp, the wind moaning like a voice that couldn't remember what it wanted to say. On the second day, she reached compact clay. It was smoother than expected, harder than she remembered from training. She chipped at it for hours, creating a jagged spiral no wider than her shoulders. The dust clogged her mask. Her arms cramped. The wind carried her sweat away before it reached her skin. By the fifth day, her nails had bled. The knuckles of her gloves were worn raw. She wrapped her hands with strips of fabric torn from her inner vest and kept going. The hole was now deep enough that she had to climb in and out using knotted rope. She reinforced the walls with stones she'd baked in the sun. Primitive bricks, but effective. The work gave her a rhythm. Each stroke of the chisel echoed like a heartbeat. On the seventh day, she hit volcanic gravel. The impact made her chisel vibrate so hard it flew from her fingers. She sat there in the hole, panting, covered in grime. Her water was low. The food was tasteless paste. Her throat ached from silence, but she smiled. Gravel meant progress. She kept digging. On the ninth day, she heard the sound, faint like a whisper wrapped in stone, a hollow thump. She paused, dropped a pebble, counted the seconds. Then again, the echo came sooner. That meant space. That meant the earth was thinning. She worked with a fury she didn't know she had. Her muscles screamed. Her back felt like a broken beam. And on the 11th day, her hammer punched through, and the ground sighed beneath her. She stared at the cracks she'd made. A thin mist leaked upward, cool against her fingers. She brought her face close, felt the breath of something ancient rise past her cheeks. She dug around the breach, cleared the opening, then plunged her container deep. When she pulled it up, there it was. Water, clear, cold, and impossibly real. She didn't cheer, She didn't cry. She just sat back against the wall of her well and drank. Far above, on a high bluff carved from jagged black rock, 3 beings watched her. They had no names in human tongue, no words for what they saw. Their forms were tall and elegant, marked by skin like leather leaves and eyes set deep within protective folds. The youngest of them stepped forward, crouching low. He clicked softly, a question. The oldest did not reply. He narrowed his gaze and studied the human. She had not brought fire, she had not brought machines. She had brought her hands, and those hands had opened the earth. They watched in silence and waited. The days following the breakthrough blurred into each other, not because Tori was idle, but because her focus had shifted from struggle to function. The well, though crude and narrow, provided just enough water for her to reclaim a part of herself that had begun to fade. Awareness. No longer dehydrated and delirious, she began noticing again the tiny variations in wind pressure, the subtle changes in the sky's hue, the shifting temperature at dawn. She had moved beyond desperation. She had entered the domain of intention. Each morning, Tori woke before the first orange-gold glow bled through the clouds. She reinforced the stone lining of the well, sealing weak spots with clay, layering smooth stones, reworking the rope pulley system so the water bucket no longer scraped the sides. Her hands were cracked, blistered, and darkened with dust, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her she was alive, and more importantly that what she built had meaning. The aliens watched from the rocks. The elder's name, among his own kind, had once meant root that survives fire. In the modern tongue of his people, which had become more gesture than sound over the centuries, he was called Auric. He moved with the slowness of authority, never rushing, always conserving. His 2 companions, Ural, younger and leaner, and Screen, the smallest and most restless, flanked him like shadows clinging to the spine of the cliff. Each night the trio descended slightly closer, though never far enough for Tori to see them. They took shifts, careful not to disturb her routine. They spoke to each other in glances and rippling shifts of their skin tone, a language of muscle tension, breath pressure, and color pulses. They had witnessed many humans before, from the early arrival ships that scorched the ground to the automated diggers that tore up the fungal meadows that once blanketed Nirax 6. The humans had brought towers, noise, walls, and then nothing. Retreat. Auric had watched colonies rise like bone spikes from the land and fall just as quickly, as if the planet itself had rejected them. He had told no one that a human had stayed behind. No one would have believed it, and yet here she was, alone, fragile, digging with her own hands like one of the old ones, as if her bones knew something her machines had forgotten. Ural crouched low beside a growth of stone coral and tilted his head. He whispered, not in words but in clicks and tone shifts. "She is a deceiver," his body said, "a clever trap. She makes the land seem friendly, but when we go to drink she will strike." Auric did not respond. He remained upright, eyes narrowed, arms clasped behind his back. His gaze had not moved from the well for hours. "She sleeps alone," Screen said. "She does not carry flame. She speaks only to herself." Auric lifted a hand. The 2 younger ones froze. Tori had emerged from her shelter. She walked slowly toward the well, dragging a broken crate filled with flat stones. She sat beside the edge and began layering the stones into a crude outer ring, shaping a sort of low wall. The movements were careful, measured. She shifted each piece 2 or 3 times before committing. Occasionally she paused and stretched her fingers, massaging her wrist, rotating her shoulder. "She builds," Auric said finally. Ural's tone flattened. "She builds traps. She builds," Auric repeated, more firmly. The aliens fell into silence again. Later that afternoon, the wind picked up. Tori's tarp rattled loudly, the edge flapping with each gust. She cursed under her breath and knelt beside the corner to tie it down again, using thick vines from a nearby cluster of thornbrush. As she worked, her hand brushed against something cold. She looked up. On the ledge of a nearby rock, nestled in the crevice, sat a fruit. Oval-shaped, pale blue, with a translucent skin that shimmered faintly. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at the cliffs. Nothing moved. She didn't eat it. Not right away. She placed it in her tool bag and finished anchoring the tarp. When night fell, she sat by the well and held the fruit in her hand, running her fingers across the smooth surface. She knew of nothing in the colony records that matched this exact fruit. She took a single bite. It was sweet, so sweet it made her eyes water. She chewed slowly, letting the juice pool on her tongue. It tasted like childhood and memory. And when she was done, she wiped her fingers on her pant leg, leaned back, and whispered into the stars, "I don't know who you are, but thank you." Auric listened from his perch, his eyes half closed. Ural fidgeted behind him, visibly disturbed. "She speaks to the sky, to the dead, to nothing." Screen tilted his head. "No, she speaks to us." The elder said nothing, but his heart agreed. The act was not a signal, not a manipulation. It was gratitude, soft and vulnerable. Something no human had offered before. The next day, Tori left something near the same rock. A small metal spoon, polished clean, tied to a piece of colored cloth. She set it down carefully, then walked away. By nightfall, it was gone. Over the following days, the quiet exchange continued. One morning, she found a bundle of long, flexible reeds beside her shelter, stronger than the vines she'd been using to bind the well wall. Another day, she discovered a smooth obsidian knife embedded in the sand like an offering. In return, she left more objects: buttons, mirror shards, a drawing etched into bark, a sketch of her well, and 3 tall silhouettes watching from above. Still, she never saw them. Still, they remained hidden, but the unspoken language had begun. At twilight, she sat beside the well and began humming. A tune from Earth, an old lullaby her mother once sang. The words were gone, but the melody remained. She hummed quietly, fingers tracing spirals in the dust, the bucket resting full beside her. Auric watched from the rocks, head tilted. He closed his eyes and listened. "Do we reveal ourselves?" Screen asked in the clicking hush of their tongue. Ural's jaw tensed. "No, we wait. She will eventually show her true nature." But Auric did not agree. "She already has." In the world that had once turned to ash, a well now breathed, and around that well a thread had formed. Thin, fragile, but real. Not a rope, not a chain, not a weapon. A bridge. And the old one understood. Bridges never begin with feet. They begin with silence, with watching, with waiting. And with water. Tori knew something was changing. It was in the air, subtle but unmistakable. The silence around her no longer felt hollow. It had gained a pulse. It beat between the cliffs, lingered near the well, and swelled gently at the edges of her thoughts like the ocean waves she hadn't seen since she left Earth 10 years ago. She still hadn't seen a soul, hadn't heard a voice beyond her own breath. But she wasn't alone. She felt it in her skin, in her instincts, in the soft hum beneath the ground. Something was watching. Something was near. She no longer left offerings with the hope of return. Now it had become ritual, a quiet act of acknowledgement. She laid out a line of pebbles in the shape of a spiral and placed a small copper badge at the center. It had once belonged to her father, a security pin from a mining colony that failed before she was born. She didn't need it anymore. She pressed it into the dirt with her thumb and whispered. The next morning, it was gone. That day, for the first time, she found footprints. They weren't human. They weren't booted. The marks were long, arched impressions, almost talon-like, with fine ridges between the toes, as though the feet had gripping filaments or pads. 3 distinct sets, each with a slightly different stride, circling the well at a distance. One had stepped closer. Just one. Close enough that the impression overlapped a print she had left with her heel. Tori crouched by the closest track and touched the edges. The dirt had not yet hardened from the morning wind. These prints were fresh. She looked around slowly, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The cliffs stood motionless. The wind barely brushed her cheek, and the sun hung low in a dull orange sky. Its light filtered through the permanent haze. She stood up, slowly, deliberately, and walked toward the well. She filled her bucket, then poured a bowl of water and placed it on a flat stone near the edge of the prints. She sat down beside it, not facing the cliffs this time, but keeping her body turned slightly, eyes low, posture relaxed. She said nothing. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sun moved behind a patch of cloud and the temperature dropped. Her back ached from sitting still, but she didn't move. She heard a sound, faint, like the rustle of paper through sand, not wind, not rocks shifting. She resisted the urge to look. The sound came again, then silence, and then a shadow touched her peripheral vision. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head. He stood no more than 10 meters from her. He was tall, easily 2 heads higher than she, and his body was wrapped in pale green leathery skin with smooth plates that shifted slightly as he breathed. His arms were long, ending in clawed fingers, but the claws were retracted, folded under like curled leaves. His face was narrow, not like a skull, but like a sharpened mask. His eyes, large and dark, blinked with a translucent membrane that slid sideways. She held her breath. Her pulse was a thunder in her ears. The alien did not move. He looked at the bowl of water. She slowly raised her hand, not toward him, but to the bowl, and nudged it forward 1/2 meter. She lowered her hand again and rested it in her lap, open, palms up. He took 1 step forward, then another. His gaze never left hers. When he reached the bowl, he knelt, not like a soldier, but like a beast, with reverence, and leaned forward. He did not drink from the bowl. Instead, he touched it, gently, with 2 fingers. Then he placed something beside it, a small shard of bone, polished white and carved with a spiral that mirrored the pattern she had left in the sand days before. She stared at it. He straightened and waited. She reached out and picked it up. His posture shifted. A ripple of color crossed his shoulder. Pale green faded into a flush of warm gold. He lowered his head slightly. "Thank you," she said. He didn't respond with words, but he placed his palm to his chest. Then he turned and walked away, long legs bending at odd angles as he moved with fluid grace toward the cliffs. She sat frozen for a long time. When the others came the next evening, they didn't hide. There were 3 in total. The tall one, she now called him the first, stood nearest to her, always between her and the others. One was leaner, sharper in movement, with skin that shimmered slightly in the fading light. He circled, never close, but always watching. The third was smaller, his features less rigid, his movements more impulsive. He crouched by the well at one point and mimicked her motion from days ago, dropping a pebble down and listening. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She offered water in the bowl again. All 3 came, one at a time. None drank directly. Each touched the bowl. Each left something small. A curved feather, a chunk of brittle crystal, a knot of dried vines tied in a figure 8. She accepted them all. Over the next days, the visits became routine. Not daily, but often. She never tried to approach. She let them come. In time, she noticed how the first would scan the ground before stepping, how the lean one, who she now thought of as the scout, watched the horizon constantly, as if guarding from a danger unseen. The smaller one, whom she named Sprig, began to linger longer, even crouching near her when she worked on reinforcing the well's edge. She showed him how she shaped the clay. She let him touch her tools. He chirped once, a high sound, almost a question, and she nodded. She didn't know what he had asked, but the exchange felt enough. Then, on the 17th night, something new happened. As she sat by the fire pit, with her back to the wind, the first stepped forward, carrying something wrapped in dried leaves. He placed it at her feet and retreated. Inside was food, not alien food. Human rations, one of the old emergency packs, dented, slightly crushed, but unopened. Her breath caught. That meant they had salvaged it from a crash, a ruin, or perhaps even a dead outpost. They had touched human remains, and they had chosen to bring her something from it. She stood and bowed, not deeply, but enough that her spine curved and her hands dropped low in front of her. When she straightened, she said only, "I see you." The first tilted his head. Then, slowly, he raised both hands to his face, touched his forehead with the back of his claws, and lowered them toward her. That night, as she ate the ration under the stars, Tori realized something profound. This was not first contact. This was second trust. She had not found them. She had earned them. The days that followed were marked by something new. Movement with intention, labor with companionship. What had once been a solitary rhythm of survival evolved into shared ritual. Tori no longer built alone. She still woke before sunrise, still listened to the wind as if it were giving her instructions. But now the silence was joined by soft steps behind her, the rustle of alien feet through the dust, and the distant thud of stone meeting earth. The visitors no longer came and went in secrecy. They arrived openly, not speaking, not signaling, but with clear purpose. That morning she worked beside the well, stacking the final layer of kiln-dried bricks she had fired from the local clay. The new reinforcement would protect the water shaft from collapsing under pressure. The bricks were uneven, but hardened well under her makeshift solar shield. As she arranged the top row, she noticed a shadow stretch over the rim. She turned slowly. It was Sprig. He knelt across from her and held out a cluster of wide green leaves bundled in a thick braid of vine. She took it carefully, unwrapped it, and found strips of dried fungal root wrapped around pale-colored beetle shells. She sniffed it. Earthy, edible, possibly bitter, but not dangerous. "Trade?" she asked softly. Sprig tilted his head and tapped 2 fingers against the dirt, then pointed to the stack of unused bricks. Tori smiled. She handed him one. He sat down beside her, clutching it like a sacred object, and began tracing patterns into the soft surface with his claw. Swirling lines, broken rings, and 2 vertical bars crossed with notches. She watched him, mesmerized. This wasn't random. It was language, a form of recording. A few meters away, the first was placing long slabs of sun-bleached stone around the base of her tarp shelter. She hadn't asked for that. She hadn't instructed anyone. But he had taken it upon himself to reinforce her space, just as she had fortified the well. The understanding passed between them without words. Ural the scout remained farther out, his tall figure half concealed beneath the twisted trunks of the ridge trees. He never interfered, but his eyes never rested. Tori knew he watched the horizon not for beauty, but for threats. She still didn't know what he expected to come, but she respected the silent vigilance. It was a kind of care. As the sun climbed higher, heat thickened the air. Tori took a break from the wall, fetched a bowl of water and passed it to Sprig. He did not drink, but he placed his hand over the bowl and bowed his head. She followed the gesture, touching the back of her hand to her chest, then to her forehead, an adapted form of his people's greeting. He chirped quietly in reply. Later that day, she began planting. The idea had come to her days ago, but she hadn't acted on it until now. The water source was stable. The topsoil near the well had softened slightly, and beneath it she discovered a layer of silt rich enough to try. She used the broken handle of a tool to carve rows and pressed seed pods into the trenches, remnants of the failed colony's food supply experiments. Most would fail, but maybe not all. When she turned around, Sprig was copying her motion. He had found a sharp stick and was mimicking her planting gestures in a parallel row. The grooves were irregular and the spacing uneven, but he was focused, his head tilted forward, his mouth open in concentration. She laughed, not mockingly, but with joy, and patted his shoulder. His skin shivered in color, pulsing briefly in a greenish hue. By dusk, 4 rows were complete. She sat on a flat stone and looked over the tiny field. The seeds were barely visible beneath the dust, but the effort was enough to make her chest tighten. The wind blew across the plot, and the dust lifted like a sigh. Behind her, the first sat watching. He held one of her drawings in his long fingers, a simple sketch of the well and the first 3 visitors. He had not given it back, and she had not asked. That night, something shifted. She awoke to the sound of voices, not human, but the clicking hum of alien breath rhythms being exchanged in urgency. She scrambled from her tarp and found Ural crouched near the well, his head low, his skin darkened to a near charcoal shade. The first stood over him, arms slightly outstretched. Sprig paced in a tight circle, chirping in panic. Tori approached slowly, palms raised. "What's wrong?" No one responded. Ural's hand was clutched around something. She knelt beside him. He uncurled his fingers. It was a small, round disc, human-made, scorched, marked with the insignia of the old colony. An earth crest, half melted, the numbers unreadable. She had seen such things before in abandoned outposts. But it wasn't the object that had shaken him. It was the implication. Someone, or something, had left it nearby. Recently, she looked up. Did someone come here? The first made a low, guttural sound, his first audible vocalization in her presence. It wasn't language, but it was enough. His eyes met hers, and she understood. Someone else had walked this ground. Someone not welcome. A threat. Sprig darted to the edge of the field and began covering the seedlings with flat stones. Uriel moved toward the cliffs. The first retrieved a bundle of reeds tied with crystal strands and placed them around the well's edge. They were marking territory. Defending it. Tori felt her heartbeat rise. She had believed she was alone before they found her. Now she feared who else might return. The next 3 days passed in caution. The aliens remained close. No more wandering. No more silent exits. They slept in a cluster of stone alcoves near the ridge, barely visible unless she knew where to look. Tori doubled her perimeter walk, repaired the tarp anchors, and added thorn brush to the base of her shelter. She gathered every usable tool and checked them twice, but nothing came. No ship, no footsteps, no more discs. Only wind. Eventually, the routine returned. The well remained untouched. The seedlings began to sprout, small, green, defiant. Sprig chirped in excitement when he spotted the first one breaking through the soil. Tori marked it with a ring of stones and etched a symbol into the side, 2 curved lines facing each other. It meant shared. That evening, the first joined her by the fire. He sat quietly for a long time, then reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a small black stone carved with holes. He blew across it. Music, not a melody like human music, but a pulsing series of tones that mimicked bird calls, wind shifts, and something like a heartbeat. Tori closed her eyes and listened. When he finished, she opened her eyes, leaned forward, and said, "We are building something." He blinked once and nodded, not with language, not with maps, not with treaties, but with hands in the dust. The field had changed. What began as 4 meager rows of uncertain seed now curved into a crescent of green life, framing the well like a wreath left by the land itself. Low stalks pushed upward in quiet defiance of the dust winds, their leaves slick with dew drawn from the air and the water pulled daily by Tori's careful hands. She walked between the rows each morning, inspecting the roots, adjusting the stones that sheltered the sprouts from erosion, and she was never alone. Sprig had made it his task to count the sprouts out loud, clicks and chirps marked with gestures and finger taps on his own chest, as if memorizing their number by imprinting each one onto his ribs. Tori watched him with a smile. She no longer tried to understand every sound. She had learned that comprehension grew not through translation, but through repetition, through shared breath, through the rituals of the living. The first spent most of his time near the edge of the basin now, where he had built a permanent perch of stone slabs and hardened soil. From this vantage he could see the entire horizon, the full arc of the camp, the field, the well, the reinforced shelter, and beyond it all the ridge from which he had once watched her in silence. Now he watched outward, not as a spy, but as a guardian. Ural remained restless. He patrolled in long ellipses, moving with silence unnatural for a figure his size. His loyalty had never softened into ease, but Tori no longer read suspicion in his stillness. He had not come to trust the world, but he had come to trust what she had made of it. On the 30th day since the music by the fire, a long shadow passed overhead. It came with no warning, no tremor, no wind change, just a sudden blot across the ochre sky and the soft whine of a slow descending engine. Tori looked up from the seedling bed and narrowed her eyes. It was a shuttle. She stood, heart pounding, not with joy, but with the prickling surge of uncertainty. The first rose from his stone platform. Ural appeared within seconds, his frame stiff and angled toward the ship. Sprig dropped to a crouch beside the well and chirped low. Tori raised her hands. "Wait here." She stepped forward, away from the field, toward the clearing at the center of the basin. The shuttle touched down without elegance, grinding dust and shards of old bone into the air as its landing gear crushed the ground beneath. The rear ramp hissed open. 2 armored figures emerged first. Scouts, faces obscured by tinted helmets. A third followed, thinner, dressed in light gray command garb with the pale emblem of the Reconstruction Corps stitched across his left breast. He approached. "Name?" he asked without greeting. "Tory Briggs," she said. He tapped a screen on his forearm. "Confirmed. You're listed as Not anymore." "Who's with you?" She hesitated. "Locals." He raised an eyebrow. "We didn't register any sentient life signs." "You didn't look." He glanced past her shoulder toward the far rocks. The first stood still, tall and unmistakably aware. The man blinked, then touched the communicator in his collar. "We'll need an isolation team." "No," Tori said. He turned back to her. "Excuse me?" She stepped closer. "You're not taking them anywhere. This isn't a specimen site." He studied her. "You've gone native." She didn't smile. "No. I've gone human. Something we tend to forget in uniform." Behind her, the others remained motionless. The first had not moved. Ural stood beside him. Sprigg crouched near the crops, his hand cupped protectively over the tallest shoot. The commander exhaled through his nose and adjusted his tone. "Your water source, is it stable?" "How deep?" 60 meters? He nodded. That's promising. HQ has an interest in reviving Nirac 6. We were preparing to write it off again, but if it can support subsistence," Tori cut him off. "It already does." He paused. "We'll need to inspect the area. You'll need to ask first." He stared at her, long enough to press discomfort into the silence. Then he nodded, but only just. "Fine. We'll begin assessment protocols. No interference. We'll be back in 72 hours. In the meantime, consider your status transferred to recovered." He turned and walked away. The shuttle hissed again as it lifted off, kicking a spiral of grit into the air before disappearing into the haze. Tori didn't turn to look at her companions until the dust had fully settled. The first tilted his head. Ural's body remained coiled. Sprigg slowly straightened. She raised her hands, palms forward. "They'll return." No one moved. "They'll come to take." Still no response, "But we will not let them." At that, the first stepped forward and placed his hand on her shoulder. Not briefly, not formally, but fully. Weight and intent pressed through the contact. She leaned into it, just slightly, enough to say, "I know." Over the next days, the camp changed again, not because of fear, but because of preparation. They reinforced the well with a second ring of stones. Ural built barriers from scavenged plating. Sprigg helped dig irrigation canals with a tool she had once used to chip through volcanic gravel. The first spent long hours carving symbols into a standing monolith near the perimeter, a declaration, she believed, of belonging. Not a warning, a promise. When the shuttle returned, it brought drones. It did not bring soldiers. The humans scanned, measured, observed, but they did not touch the crops. They did not cross the well, and they did not speak to the locals. Tori stood in the center of it all, sun-baked, dust-covered, her hands scarred and her hair twisted into rough braids. She did not speak unless spoken to. She did not smile unless someone offered water. The visitors came and went, but she remained, and so did the green. The camp had no name. No flag, no leader, but it had rhythm, it had growth, it had memory, and at its center stood the well, not a symbol of survival, but of meeting, of invitation, of peace earned, not granted. Long after the reports filed and the surveys archived, Tori stood beside the well and poured a bowl of water. The first stepped forward, touched the rim with 2 fingers, then stepped aside. Sprigg drank. Ural watched. "And Tori?" She smiled, because the well still breathed. And now, so did the planet.